I stood in my sister's driveway with my granddaughter's hand wrapped around two of my fingers, a suitcase split open at the seam behind us. And I knocked on a door I helped pay the mortgage on 20 years ago. My sister looked through the window, looked right at the two of us, and pulled the curtain shut. My brother-in-law came out instead, told me there wasn't room, and shut the door so gently it was almost worse than if he'd slammed it. I stood there in the cold for a long moment, and then I said 3 words to myself, quiet enough that only I could hear them. Remember this, Patricia? That's what happened. This is what happened after. My name is Patricia, and 18 months ago I would have told you I had a good life, not an extraordinary one, but a good one. The kind you build slowly over decades without noticing how much weight it's carrying until it collapses. I was 56 years old. I had a townhouse in a quiet part of Columbus, Ohio, with a kitchen island I'd saved up for, a Honda CR-V with 110,000 miles on it that still ran like new, and a granddaughter named Junie, who I had raised since she was 11 months old. Junie was my daughter Hazel's child. Hazel had her at 20, with a man who was gone before the baby could hold up her own head, and Hazel herself struggled. The kind of struggle nobody wants to say out loud at the dinner table. Drugs, mostly. A few stretches of trying to get clean that lasted just long enough to break my heart all over again when they didn't hold. By the time Junie was a toddler, it was just understood, without anyone formally deciding it, that I was raising her. I didn't mind. I want to say that clearly, because people hear raising my granddaughter at 56, and they assume resentment. There wasn't any. Junie was the best thing that happened to me in a decade that hadn't given me much. I'd been divorced 11 years by then. My ex-husband, Gerald, was a perfectly fine man to be married to for the first half of our marriage, and a stranger by the second half. The kind of slow drift where you wake up one day and realize you've been living parallel lives in the same house. No affair, no big dramatic betrayal, just two people who stopped reaching for each other, and never noticed until it was too late to start again. We split things fairly. He moved to Arizona. We were civil at Junie's birthday parties, which was more than some divorced couples could say. I worked as a billing supervisor at a regional hospital network, the kind of steady, unglamorous job that pays the mortgage and doesn't make for interesting cocktail party conversation, but that I was good at and had been doing for 19 years. I had savings. Not a fortune, but something. I had a 401k I'd been faithfully contributing to since my 30s. I had, in other words, spent my whole adult life being the responsible one, the one who showed up, the one other people called when they needed something. So when the call came from my sister Diane that our father, Walter, had fallen and broken his hip, I didn't think twice. I drove the 4 hours to Dayton that same night, left Junie with a trusted neighbor for 2 days while I got Dad settled, helped get him into a rehab facility, then drove back. It was, I thought, just what family did for each other. What I did not anticipate was how much that drive would matter 6 weeks later, when everything in my own life fell apart in the space of about 9 days. It started with my job. The hospital network announced a restructuring. My entire billing department, 19 years of seniority in all, was eliminated in one afternoon meeting that lasted exactly 11 minutes. Severance was modest, 6 weeks' pay. I was 56, which meant I was old enough that employers looked at my resume and got quietly nervous, and young enough that I had no real path to early retirement that wouldn't gut what little savings I had. 3 days after that, the landlord who owned my townhouse, I'd been renting, not owning, something I'd never been embarrassed about until that exact week, informed me he was selling the property to his son-in-law and needed me out within 60 days. Legal, clean, nothing I could fight, just devastatingly impossibly timed. And then, on a Tuesday that I will remember in granular detail for the rest of my life, Hazel called me from a number I didn't recognize, crying so hard I could barely understand her, to tell me she'd relapsed again, that she was going into a 90-day inpatient program starting that Friday. Voluntary this time, her choice, and that she needed me to keep Junie full-time, no part-time arrangement anymore, just full-time, indefinitely, while she tried, one more time, to get herself right. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. Junie was 7 years old by then, in 2nd grade, and she was already mine in every way that mattered except the paperwork, so there I was. No job, no home in 60 days. A 7-year-old depending on me completely. and exactly one thought in my head: my family. I have 2 siblings, Diane and a brother named Reuben, and parents who, at the time, I would have described as close, loving, the kind of family that shows up. My mother, Sandra, had a guest suite in her house that hadn't been used for anything but storing Christmas decorations in 4 years. My sister Diane had a 4-bedroom colonial outside Dayton, with 2 empty bedrooms since her own kids moved out. I genuinely believed, with the kind of naivety that embarrasses me now, that I had options. I called my mother first, told her everything: the job, the eviction, Hazel, Junie. Asked if Junie and I could stay with her for 2 months, maybe 3. Just long enough to find work and get back on my feet. There was a silence on the phone that I now understand was the sound of someone deciding how to disappoint me gently. "Patricia," she said, "you know your father's hip isn't fully healed. Having a young child running around right now would be a lot for him." Junie was not a child who ran around. Junie was a quiet, watchful 7-year-old who read chapter books at the kitchen table and asked permission before opening the refrigerator. "Mom," I said, "I wouldn't be asking if I had anywhere else to go." "I think," she said, choosing each word like she was picking through a minefield, "you need to think about whether you're equipped to be doing all this at your age. Maybe it's time Junie went into the foster system properly, where people are trained for this." I didn't say anything for a long moment, because I genuinely did not trust what would come out of my mouth. Reuben was no better. He told me, almost cheerfully, that his place was a 1-bedroom and that was that. End of conversation, even though I hadn't asked him for anything yet, and he volunteered the rejection before I could finish my sentence, which left Diane. Diane and I had always been close, or so I thought. The kind of sisters who called each other for nothing, who remembered each other's work anniversaries, who'd driven 4 hours together 1,000 times for one family emergency or another. Diane had 2 empty bedrooms. Diane's kids were grown and gone. Diane, surely, would understand. I drove to her house on a Saturday morning, with Junie buckled in the back seat, and most of what we owned crammed into the trunk and back seat of the CRV, because the moving truck for the storage unit was coming Monday, and I genuinely had nowhere else for our things to go in the meantime. Except wherever we were going to sleep that night. I knocked on Diane's door, the way I'd knocked on it 100 times before, without a second thought. The knock of someone who belongs there. I saw the curtain in the front window move. I saw my sister's face, clear as anything, look right at me and right at Junie standing beside me holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear, and then I watched the curtain fall back into place. It was my brother-in-law, Patrick, who came to the door instead, a decent enough man under ordinary circumstances, the kind who grills on Sundays and remembers everyone's coffee order, but clearly operating under instruction. "Patricia," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "Diane and I talked about it. We just don't have the room for this right now." "Patrick, there are 2 empty bedrooms in this house. I've slept in one of them." "It's complicated," he said, which is what people say when they don't want to say the actual reason. "Maybe you should talk to Hazel's father's side of the family, or look into assistance programs. There are resources for situations like this." Situations like this. As if Junie were a situation. As if I were a situation. I asked, because some stubborn part of me needed to hear it directly, if Diane would come to the door herself. He said she wasn't feeling up to it. I stood on that porch a moment longer than I needed to, mostly because Junie's hand had found mine, and I didn't want her to see me leave too fast. Didn't want her to think we were running from something. Then I said okay, just that. And we got back in the car. Diane called 4 days later. Not to apologize, but to check in, and to mention, almost as an aside, that she'd heard from our mother that I was really struggling, and that she hoped I wasn't going to do anything that would jeopardize Junie's well-being. Like, try to keep raising her without proper support, when there were people trained for these situations. I asked her what people. She didn't have an answer. I told her I needed some time and hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. We spent the first 11 nights in an extended stay motel off Route 4. The kind with a kitchenette the size of a closet and a parking lot that smelled like exhaust. It cost more than I had any business spending, but it had 2 beds and a working lock on the door, and Junie, God bless her 7-year-old heart, decided it was an adventure. She named the ice machine down the hall Mr. Rattles, because of the noise it made, and insisted on saying goodnight to it every evening on our way back from the vending machine. I won't dwell too long on those 11 nights, because the story isn't really about how bad it got, though it got plenty bad. There was a week where I ate peanut butter on crackers for dinner. 3 nights running because I'd spent what I had left on a winter coat for Junie. When the motel's heating system gave out overnight in October, there was a night I sat in the bathroom with the fan running so she wouldn't hear me, and let myself feel the entire weight of it. The job, the eviction, my own sister's curtain falling shut, and then I washed my face, turned off the fan, and went back to being her grandmother, because that was the job, regardless of what else was happening. What I want to tell you about is what I built after that. A woman named Carlene ran the front desk at the motel, and we got to talking one evening when I was paying for another night in cash. I'd counted out twice to make sure it was right. She mentioned, casually, that the hospital system across town, not the one that laid me off, a different, larger one, was hiring billing supervisors, that her cousin worked in HR there, and the listing had been up for 2 weeks with no good applicants. I had my resume updated and emailed within the hour, sitting on the edge of a motel bed with Junie asleep beside me. I got an interview within 4 days, and the job within 2 weeks. Better pay than my old position, actually, because I came in with 19 years of experience, and they were desperate to fill the role before the holidays. I cried in the parking lot after the interview, the kind of crying that comes from relief so sharp it feels like pain. Finding housing took longer. I didn't have the credit history of someone who'd never had a financial emergency, and a lot of landlords look sideways at a 56-year-old woman with a 7-year-old in tow and no spouse on the lease. But a property management company finally took a chance on a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near Junie's new school. Modest, a little worn around the edges, but clean and ours. I signed the lease the same week the foster care intake worker, who I'd called myself, on Diane's suggestion, just to understand what my options actually were, told me kindly that there was no reason in the world Junie shouldn't stay exactly where she was, with me, that I was doing precisely what a kinship guardian was supposed to do, and that she'd help me file the paperwork to make my custody official and permanent. That paperwork took 4 months. Hazel, to her enormous credit, supported it fully from inside her treatment program. She wrote a letter for the court herself, said she trusted me with Junie's life, more than she trusted herself with it right now, and that she wanted it in writing, so nobody could ever again suggest Junie belonged anywhere else. I have that letter saved in a folder I keep for Junie, for when she's older. I got full legal guardianship in March. Hazel finished her 90 days and then chose, on her own, to stay another 60 in a step-down program, the longest stretch of sustained recovery she'd had since she was 19 years old. She calls Junie every Sunday now. It's not a fixed relationship, not a simple one, but it's an honest one, and that's more than we had before. My mother found out about the guardianship through Reuben, who heard it from a cousin, because our town, much like most towns, runs on gossip faster than it runs on anything official. She called me the week after, the first time she'd called since the conversation about Junie and the foster system. I heard everything worked out, she said, her voice carrying that particular brightness people use when they want credit for an outcome they had nothing to do with. I'm so relieved. Are you? I said, not really a question. Patricia, you have to understand. We were just worried about you taking on too much. Mom, I understand completely. I understood it on Diane's porch when the curtain closed. I've understood it every day since. There was a pause, and then the sighing started. The gentle implication that I was being difficult, that families go through hard seasons, that we needed to move past it for Junie's sake. I let her talk until she ran out of things to say. Then I told her I needed more time before I was ready to talk again, and that I would reach out when I was. I haven't rushed that particular timeline, and I don't intend to. Diane texted about 5 months after the guardianship was finalized. A long message, the kind with several paragraphs, about how she'd been thinking and processing, and how she hadn't realized how it would look from my side, and how she hoped we could find our way back to each other. I read it twice. I thought about the curtain falling shut with my granddaughter standing right there, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. I wrote back something brief and not unkind. Thank you for reaching out. I need more time. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. She has not stopped trying since. Texts every few weeks. Each one a little more aware, I think, of how badly she miscalculated that Saturday morning. I read every one. I take my time with my answers when I answer at all. Ruben hasn't reached out once, which tells me everything I need to know and saves me the trouble of asking. My father sent a card in December. Just a small one, with "thinking of you" and Junie written in his own shaky handwriting. The hip injury having slowed his writing down along with everything else. I put it on Junie's bulletin board, because it's her grandfather's handwriting. And that piece of it, at least, I can let be separate from the rest. 5 months into the new job, my supervisor, a sharp, plain-spoken woman named Cordelia, who'd clearly had a hard road of her own at some point, recommended me for a department manager position that had opened up. I almost talked myself out of applying, the old fear creeping back in, the idea that I'd somehow used up my allotment of good luck. I applied anyway. I got it. The raise was significant enough that I sat very still at my kitchen table for a full minute after I saw the offer letter, doing the math twice to make sure I hadn't misread it. We moved again that spring, into a 3-bedroom rental house with an actual yard, small but real, with a maple tree. Junie immediately declared belonged to her specifically. She picked out the paint color for her room herself, a green she called frog green with great seriousness, and I let her paint one wall by herself, even though the lines wandered considerably. It's still wandering. I haven't fixed it and I don't plan to. She's 8 now. A few weeks ago she came and stood next to me at the kitchen counter while I was making dinner, watched me stir the pot for a moment, the way she does when she's working up to saying something, and finally said, "Grandma, I think we're doing okay now." I told her I thought so too. She nodded, satisfied the way she does, and went back to her homework at the table, and I stood there stirring dinner, and thinking about a curtain falling shut, and 3 words I'd said quietly to myself on a porch in the cold. There's a particular kind of vindication that doesn't come with anyone admitting they were wrong. Nobody hands you an apology with a bow on it. It's quieter than that. It's a lease with your own name on it. It's a 401k that's slowly rebuilding itself. It's a paycheck you don't have to explain to anyone. It's a little girl falling asleep in her own room, under her own wandering green wall, in a house you built back up from a motel room, and 11 nights of counting cash on a bedspread. And you wake up the next morning and she asks for waffles, and you have absolutely no memory, in that particular moment, of how hard it was to get here, which is exactly how it's supposed to feel, eventually. Hazel is doing well, genuinely well, 8 months clean now, working part-time, seeing Junie every other weekend with supervised visits that are slowly, carefully becoming unsupervised. I don't know exactly what our family will look like in 5 years, but I know it'll be one Junie chose to be part of, not one she was simply handed. I've stopped waiting for an apology from my mother or my sister, or my brother, not because they don't owe me one. They do, and I think some part of each of them knows it. But because I've learned something in the last 18 months nobody told me at 56, which is that waiting for an apology is its own way of staying stuck on someone else's porch. I'm not interested in staying anywhere I had to beg my way into. I don't tell this story looking for sympathy. I have a job I'm good at, a granddaughter who tells me we're doing okay and means it, and a green wall with wandering paint lines that I look at every single day and feel something close to pride. I'm telling it because I know there's someone listening right now standing at some version of that door, holding a child's hand, watching a curtain fall shut on people who were supposed to love them no matter what. I need you to know it isn't the end. It feels like the end. It is, I promise you, only the beginning. The people who closed that door on me are living the exact same lives they were living 18 months ago. Same house, same curtains, same excuses. While I built something entirely new out of a motel room, a pot of dinner on a stove that's mine, and 3 words I said to myself in the cold, there is no sweeter outcome than that. If someone ever closed a door on you when you needed them most, what did you do with that? Tell me in the comments. Tell me in the comments because I've learned this community understands something. It took me far too long to learn myself. The people who say there's no room for you are usually just afraid of who you'll become once you stop knocking and start building.